يا لغتي عربية حسبي بأنك منطقي وبياني عربية قلبي.
You have to think about all of the injunctions, the prescriptions, the do's and the don'ts.
Of course.
From the Quran and the Sunnah as branches from the proverbial tree. The core of the tree, the root of the tree are the principles, the overriding universal principles which underpin the religion of Islam, which include things like, obviously at the core of it, Tawheed, the idea of one God, believing in one God, submission to one God, and these things there. So, and obviously the evidences of the Prophet Muhammad and the Quran and the Sunnah and these things. So one is convinced epistemologically with the fact that Islam is truth, with a capital T, and that it comes from God, then that constitutes the root of the tree. The branches of the tree then become the injunctions which become almost automatically subscribed to. Because we think, okay, well, human beings have X amount of ways of structuring societies aforetime, presently, and continually. So if that's the case, who knows best on how to structure society, how individuals should live in a familial context, how a family should live in a societal context, and so on and so forth, how governments should run. So the Islamic answer would be, God knows best. Allahu A'lam, we would say, God knows best.
Of course.
So if that's the case, then it makes sense for us to use Quran as the ultimate barometer by which and through which we assess all of those other political philosophies, including liberalism, feminism, etc., and wherein which they differ with the Quranic discourse or the Islamic discourse, we would reject them. Now, why I find it sometimes contradictory for someone to identify themselves as a liberal Muslim, and here when I talk about liberalism, I'm talking about a political philosophy, or a feminist Muslim, and once again, I'm talking about the political philosophy, is because the scholastic traditions that are associated with those respective political philosophies, for example, are not always in contradistinction with the Quranic and Islamic narrative. I feel like at one point there has to be compromise. The Quran says, وَدُّوا لَوْ تُدْهِنُوا فَيُدْهِنُونَ. They wish that you can compromise so that they can compromise with you.
Of course.
So the Quran says
This is it.
Exactly,
yes.
right.
This is it.
So you compromise with them, and you will compromise with you compromise with them. So there is a mutual compromise, which Islam at the base level doesn't allow. In fact, it criticizes.
It does, yeah.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is that you have to kind of choose the direction you want to live your life in. You can't be pulled apart.
Oh, no, I was doing my hand. Like,
you know what I mean?
Go.
You can't be pulled apart. And in psychology, the people that actually live like that are associated with something called cognitive dissonance. So for me, and that's why I made recently, I got a Twitter account. I'm just kind of putting quotes there, you know. I put a Twitter post recently, a tweet. It's a cool tweet, I'm new to the thing, right?
I haven't got one, so I wouldn't even know.
I'm very new to it myself. So I was saying that I put a tweet that so-called feminist Muslims are either uninformed or unsatisfied with either Islam or feminism respectively, right? That's the situation. Because, for instance, when we talk about inheritance, if we look at the scholastic tradition, the inheritance laws in the Quran would not be in contradistinction with the feminist narrative. The so-called patriarchal narrative of the feminists would not be in contradistinction with the family unit and the fact that the father is, has these rights and the mother has these rights in Islam and the husband has these rights in Islam. So you have to make a compromise, or you have to falsify your belief. You have to fake your belief. You have to pretend that you believe in something when you don't actually believe in something. Or you have to superimpose a narrative on one of those things. So you either superimpose an Islamic narrative on the feminist discourse, or vice versa.
See, I feel like you're in danger of doing exactly what you accuse other people of doing, and this is where I think we need to draw a conclusion, just so that, like you said, there can be a compromise on both sides, so that we can build a bridge together and work together. So obviously, I'll start off with the first thing, because you said a few things, which is really good. Like with the superstition thing, yes, there is a leniency to excusing it to mumbo jumbo, superstition and supernatural, whatever. But if we look at it historically and factually, superstitions were actually certain things that were made to be supernatural and uncontrollable by human beings in order to deter any behavior within that ethic, within that environment. I'll give you the mummy's tombs curse, for example, right? Why do we have the mummy's tombs curse? We have the mummy's tombs curse because people were trying to excavate the pyramids at the time. But you had a lot of pyramid robbers basically taking the gold and all the riches of the pharaohs back when. Now, historically, that's not good because that's evidence that they're taking historically from us. So they made up this myth, right, of the superstitious mummy's curse to keep people away from that. and it worked very well. And it's the same with aliens, right? We have a civilization of supposedly white supremacy who love to speak about aliens, especially when it comes to foreign works of architecture. Like they'll often say the aliens built the pyramids. The aliens didn't build the pyramids. They're just scared to admit that black people built the pyramids or Africans built the pyramids because it takes away their valid reason of supposedly enslaving subhuman human beings. So when we're talking about superstition, yes, there's that side of paranormal activity if you've ever seen the film, but then there's also the real side of politically.
How would you define superstition yourself?
For me, I use superstition as the word, in particular in this case, in the sense that a subject is not necessarily something that you should delve into, right? Because it may lead you astray or you may do something wrong.
Say that again.
So superstition for me, like you said, there's the paranormal extra movie, the dramatized Hollywood version that you want to.
What is, like, when you say paranormal?
Yeah.
So once again, because the thing
uncontrollable by human behavior or human power.
So most things which, in that definition of superstition, which are unexplainable by human beings, would be, in your definition, superstitious.
Yeah.
So for example, quantum mechanics. Is that superstitious?
It would have been superstitious back in the day, and you probably would have been executed for talking about it.
No, but today.
Yeah, now,
we can't explain it.
But this is the thing, we have more science and we have more books to actually educate. Back in the day, people could not read. Reading was only reserved for the liberal elite or the elite in general.
No, but
meaning that,
sorry, just
go on. No, go ahead. I just wanted to say, in particular, we had people that could not read. So getting this information was not easy for them, and they saw it as works of the extraordinary. And this is why you had the Salem witch trials and the...
That's why definitions are very important.
They are very important.
So if we define superstition as that which we can't explain.
Yeah.
Now, if we do a double split experiment,
not necessarily
with a wave and a particle, and you know what I'm saying, we shoot an electron.
Yeah.
You know, and we put a slit in the middle like that, and we see how does it react in certain conditions. We'll find that all of the laws of formal logic are completely suspended in that situation. Right. Literally, what's happening is magic.
Yeah.
So on a quantum level, we don't know why that is happening.
We don't know yet.
Yeah, we don't know yet. But the point is, we don't know. We don't know.
But this is the thing. This is the thing. So, you need to realize.
So is that superstitious?
But no, because here's the thing. We have the tools to measure, observe, and assess that, and gather the knowledge after the event has happened. That's how things happen.
So what is
things happen?
Yeah.
We assess it, we observe, we measure, and then we study it after, and that's where the information comes. Right. Information never rarely ever comes.
The scientific method, but I'm still asking. So how would you define superstition?
So what I'm trying to say is there's a difference between superstition of the Hollywood kind, where everything is superly unexplainable, and there's a superstition that we can explain, which is supposed to be a deterrent for certain people to keep away from their behavior. But we can explain.
Let me ask you a question then. You know, this is a serious question.
Yeah, go on.
Do you know the double split experiment? Yeah? I'm not sure if are you aware of this experiment?
No, go.
I'm not a quantum physicist.
No, neither am I.
Yeah. All right, but this is my understanding of the experiment, okay? Yeah. You put two slits, yeah? And then you shoot an electron or an atom or something, yeah? Okay. You shoot it with like, a gun that shoots the thing. Now, if you shoot it in the first instance, it will act like basically it won't act like a particle, it will act like a wave.
Okay.
Yeah, it will act like a wave.
When you say a wave, how do you observe that it acts like a wave?
So a wave, if you look at this, is a very difficult thing to explain without anything.
No, obviously, because a particle can
a
hit
wave,
something.
for example, look at light. Light and sound are two interesting examples of waves. The way waves work is that, for example, if I shine a torch on a black wall, the way it's going to illuminate on the wall is going to be like, it's going to cover the wall with light, yeah? So it's going to be like a wave effect.
There's a lot of factors there.
Right. If you put a split in the middle, if you put like a little, let's say a hole in the middle of it, you got a hole now. You got a hole, and you got a torch. You're still going to have light on the other side, yeah. Whereas if you have let's say pellets, and you shoot it through, it's going to go only in one direction. You're only going to see one bit, which has got. So a particle acts differently to a wave. The point is, when you do a double split experiment, you realize that the particle, which we think is a particle, the electron, or in this case the atom, whatever it may be, when you shoot it through the double split, it acts like we think it acts like a particle, but it acts like a wave. So this is where it becomes even more wacky. It's become superstitious. Let me tell you something. You know, this is serious stuff. Go into this is not me just saying this. Now, if you put observational devices, like for example cameras, detectors, so that we see exactly what's happening when it goes through the split. The electron acts differently. As if it knows what's going on.
Of course.
Now, we know that atoms and electrons are not animate things.
All right.
We know that they're inanimate, right? They don't have a brain, they don't have a nucleus, they don't have a mind, they don't have knowledge. No, we know that. I mean, from science, we don't. They're not
I think
in the realm of biology.
I think generally when you say they have no minds, they have no thing or whatever, you need to remember atoms and atoms and electrons, they move.
They don't have any.
In comparison,
maybe
in comparison to stuff like stones and whatever.
Fine. Let's not say minds.
They have natural order. They have natural kind of like
accepted, but
natural
they
dynamics.
They don't have a nucleus.
But what I'm trying,
they don't have a brain. They're not biology.
They don't necessarily have a processing system the same way we do.
Fair enough. So it's not biology. It's physics. Yeah.
Yeah.
So here, why does it act like biology? Why does it act like it knows what it's doing when you're observing it? These are questions which have baffled quantum physicists. Literally, if I were to be, now if I forget about being a physicist, if I were to come in the garb of a magician, and I did the double split experiment, not as a scientist, but as a magician, everyone would describe what I'm doing as magic. Say, look, there's this kind of optical illusion, there's some kind of trickery going on. Now, the point I'm making is this, is that in the New Age scientific post-enlightenment, post-colonial discourse, now it is a post-colonial discourse.
We have to be very careful, but what I'm trying to say, this is what I'm trying to say, I actually agree with you, but the thing is, I feel like you're in danger of conflating all colonial science with just science in general. Just because science over here has advanced, it doesn't mean that they're all trying to enforce that knowledge onto other things.
And that's not my point. Now, what I'm saying is that when someone packages something in scientific jargon and terminology, it becomes more digestible for the masses, even if it's unexplainable on every level, like this particular example.
Of course. Which is why I said earlier,
so the point I'm making to you is superstition it's become a loaded term with deep connotations, which, in my opinion, new atheists like to use to try and target basically theists. So we don't want to fall into narratives. Now, that's the point I'm making to you. That just because something is scientific, it doesn't mean it's devoid. It's completely, in a sense, non-falsifiable.
Of course.
You know, and that's the whole nature of science in the first place.
But even then, even if we're talking about atheists and theists, right, you need to understand that the main thing that atheists don't understand is that the whole point of religion is that it's based on faith anyway. That's the core of it.
And so
it's
science.
based on faith. Exactly.
In many ways,
but
science is
that's what I'm saying. Atheists completely forget that point, meaning that whether or not there's proof or falsifiable evidence, the whole point is that you believe. That's the faith. That's the point of religion, and I think that's what a lot of atheists miss. But again, this is what I'm trying to say. I feel like we're trying to build bridges here, but the problem is you're conflating two different groups of people into one mass, which is basically kind of like almost attacking Islam. But the problem is, what we need to do is we need to build a bridge of understanding and a bridge of knowledge as well, from what we understand to what you understand and so on. Because if we keep doing this thing where it's a thing of New Age science is just trying to attack Islam, we're never gonna
get attack black people. Just 20, 30 years. Look at eugenics. For example, look at the program in because the thing is, we have to have one consistent way of dealing with scientific discourse. Look at, for example, how the Nazis were using science, right? I just wanted quickly. When we're talking about science, we're talking about two very different people in science. When we talk about eugenics, anyone who knows science from its key stage 3 science, right, knows that eugenics is such a futile way of looking at life because it brings down basically the survival of humanity into one specific factor. It's completely futile. It doesn't take into account natural nurture versus nature. It doesn't take into account environmental factors. It doesn't take into account a person's upbringing. It doesn't take into account many factors. No, I'm not
I understand that. But when we're talking about science, you need to remember there are different communities of the scientific community that do understand there are people that can believe, but also want to be able to explore the beliefs of certain people, the context of certain people. Now, you said in particular that when we look back historically at the rules of King Henry VIII and so on, blah, 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 and we supposedly have the science of now. We cannot look in judgment retrospectively, and I completely agree with that. But the only problem is, what we're trying to say is no one's looking back in judgment retrospectively. People are looking back historically at certain things that are myths, certain things that are geopolitical.
How do you define a myth?
How do I define a myth? Something that is common knowledge but not really proven.
Okay, so something which is unproven is false.
Yeah.
That's not correct. That's called the argument of ignorance.
Fair enough.
For example, we didn't know that Neptune existed for maybe 1,300 years. Neptune, the planet.
Okay, yeah.
All right, so Isaac Newton, he, using his own physics, he kind of inferred the existence of Neptune.
Yeah.
Okay, and then that was confirmed through observations thereafter. But just because we don't know that Neptune exists, or we can't see Neptune, it doesn't mean that Neptune is not there.
But this is exactly my
Just
point.
because something is unprovable,
Yeah.
unproven, it doesn't mean it's not true.
But this is my point. I completely agree with that stance. What I'm trying to say in particular, where we have proof historically, right, that certain geopolitical actions were used as a way of keeping control of your diaspora or your population or your demographic in general, right? We then look to certain teachings and realize that it's become more cultural and more religious and more sentimental along the way. I'll give you a fair example nowadays. We talk about modesty, right? And we talk about modesty in Islam. We have so many sisters around here, I'm not going to point at everyone, but we have so many sisters around here who are dressed very modestly. And we can see that that's not only affected them in a positive light, in the sense that we have more Islamic sisters who are educated now than we have Islamic boys. But at the same time, I would then point to yourself, who's wearing a vest top, right, and showing your very aesthetic arms. And I show, no, that's a good thing. You should be comfortable in your sexuality.
It's not nothing to do with sexuality, but I've got a vitamin D deficiency.
Understandably.
I like the sun.
No, understandably.
But it's also Islamically acceptable.
But this is what I'm trying to say. Like, when we talk about that, there may be women with vitamin D deficiency as well.
Yeah, they do. A lot of them do.
So is it then, from what we know, appropriate for them to be wearing something that completely covers them?
Do you agree with the premise that things which are identical should be treated equally?
When you say things that should be identical, you have to point that out to me.
So for example,
because rights
let's look at it mathematically, right? 2 is equivalent to, 4 is equivalent to 2 plus 2 equals 4.
Okay, yeah.
Accepted?
Yeah.
So mathematically they have the same value, yeah? Okay, so they should be treated equally. So if you wanted to times or minus or divide, 2 plus 2 equals 2 plus 2, it's the same thing as what you would do with 4.
Of course.
Okay. So we accept fundamentally that something which is identical should be treated equally.
Yeah.
Are men and women identical?
Not necessarily.
So should they be treated equally?
Of course.
In every sense.
We're talking about human rights. Wait.
Hold on.
One second. I don't want anyone.
Let me rebrand the question.
Go on.
Sorry. Should they be treated absolutely equally?
Now, when we say absolutely equally, right? Yeah. We're talking about particular in what sense? I'm talking about on a human rights part, and I'm talking about in general as a possibility of living as human beings.
No,
because
I'm saying, look.
Go on.
Because you have to understand that when we talk about logical, this is almost a logical deduction, right?
Yeah, go on.
You can come forward and we can talk. Let me come in.
Please, brother.
If we say
trying to build bridges.
if we say that things which are identical should be treated equally.
Of course.
Let me give you an easy example, and this is something, by the way, to his credit, I refuted him last week, but this week I'm going to say something to his credit. Jordan Peterson, he mentions all the time, which is the idea of hierarchies. And I'll tell you something about it. You might not like him, but the idea is this: if you have a situation, you're going on a bus. This is my example. You're going on a bus. You see, when the red bus here, it opens its doors. You know what happens?
What happens?
If there's someone with a buggy or someone with a wheelchair, they put the ramp down so that they can be facilitated and go onto the thing.
Of course.
Now, if you look at most institutions now, it's actually it's encoded within the law that this disability access has to be available for disabled people. My question to you is, do you accept the fact that disabled people should have advantages over non-disabled people in the context of society?
This is where the government gets really reductionist, because you then forget that disabled people have a condition that naturally shouldn't really exist, thus impairing them from living a normal life like a normal human being.
But that's beside the point.
No. It's actually the point. Because when we talk about human rights and we talk about equality, we talk about trying to bring about an equal amount of opportunity for everyone.
Okay,
it doesn't necessarily mean an equal thing of outcome.
Yes.
But right now we're talking about an equal sense of opportunity.
Perfect.
So when we're talking about disabled people and we're talking about people with certain conditions, even now when we're talking about men and women, you need to look back historically as to why men are built the way they are.
I'm happy with that.
And how environmental factors have added to the brute strength of men now and the ability to provide.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily just because we're different.
I would say that there's more to do with biology with that.
Oh, there's a lot to do with evolutionary biology, because you need to go back.
Depends on how you define it.
Well, you need to remember, what we have now is a product of millions of years of evolution.
Okay.
And because of those millions of years of evolution, there's a complete separate between the men and the women. And we can see evolution. We can see evolution even now.
Can I ask you a question though? Herbert Spencer talked about social evolution. It's interesting because it links perfectly to the idea of hierarchy's pre-existence. Whether you accept the theory of human evolution or not, if you're citing now what seems to be a Spencerian social evolution kind of rationale, I will say to you that look, if you accept that there's for example, if you're a feminist or you believe in that there should be equality in the way that an absolute equality in everything that men and women do, then I could turn around and say to you, well, look at it from a Herbert Spencerian evolutionary perspective.
Yeah.
If there is a patriarchy, then that's a natural patriarchy because it's the survival of the fitter.
The fittest.
And who is the fitter? Now it's the man because now he's put himself in a patriarchal position.
Yeah.
If that's the case, then that's the natural order of things. So I would say to you, look, it depends on how you want to frame this anyways. Any epistemological way you want to root this, I'll say the same thing. If we're not exactly the same, the point is this, and this is exactly what Simone de Beauvoir, she wrote in her book in the second chapter of biology, and I always cite this because I reckon it's the point of demarcation when we talk about feminists, yeah? She acknowledges full well that there are biological differences between men and women.
Yeah, of course.
And she realizes that they're not the same, just like you do, right? But what she says is despite the difference, there should be absolute equality. That's what she says. That's her argument. My question is, if you believe in the same thing, which seems to be that it is like that.
I've already distinguished it, so let's not put me in that same bracket.
No, but if you believe that despite the biological, physiological, psychological, emotional differences between men and women, there should be equality at every single level.
What divides?
The question is why?
What divides men and women for you? That's the problem. Because right now, what divides men and women for you? Because right now, I've basically demonstrated just how environmental factors, climate change, or whatever you want to call it, all of the natural selection pressures are to blame for the way we are right now. The way we look, the way we eat, the way we drink, even our culture.
But that's the side.
No, it's absolutely all enticing. All enticing. You cannot reduce the argument to just simply men and women are different without taking
why not?
Because you have to take into the reasons as to why they're different.
But even
even if we're talking even if we're talking, because this is a very important point, because when we're talking about even now the difference between men and women, right, you need to remember the reason there's a patriarchal system is because before the working world and post-modern and post-industrial whatever, there weren't safe working places for women. The death toll was high. You know, the work safety was not a thing. Human rights was not a thing. So for most people, it made sense for the woman who, if she falls pregnant, has 9 months of carrying a baby. So it makes no legitimate sense for her to be out there working in such dangerous conditions if she's holding a child. So now that's a natural thing. That's a very natural thing. We are now moving forward into the day and age where work safety is a lot better. Women have the opportunity to go into these workplaces and they feel a lot safer to go into these workplaces.
Which ones? Because if
no, that's fine.
Yeah.
Which ones? Which one? Rajiv. That's fair enough. No, we can get into the discussion about which decisions women choose, and we can get into that thing. But don't let that derail from the point that there are now places that women can work, can be 9 months pregnant, and it will not. Disadvantage development.
My argument is not that they shouldn't work.
I understand, but it should not. It's basically they can now work in a place that doesn't disadvantage the development of a child.
Okay,
and the whole point is that it's not that we're different. We're working towards one entity, which is the child. Do you not agree?
No, I accept. I don't see that this is the question I asked you, which I accept all the points you just said. I'm just saying, like. But here, that points you just made, I agree with it totally. No problem. Yeah. And you should have prefaced it by saying, I would say, just to be a bit more meticulous in the wording, right? In many...
You've been attacked too much.
No, in many workplace environments, women now have an enhanced safety because obviously mining is not like that. The military is not like that. You know, in different construction. Even look how many women garbage cleaners there are comparative to men. Of course. And the sewage women. So here, what we have to do is, so when we talk about the thing, this is the primary question. Right? Forget about religion now. Let's put religion to the side. Right? Let's put religion to the side. Okay, for the moment. Now I'm just going to cite the law of comparative advantage. If you're saying that what you would prefer in a society is, would you agree?
I haven't said anything, so you're not.
Would you agree that what's preferred in society is those with the best particular, let's say for example, skills, are able to in a society premised with meritocracy, that they will be able to, for example, supply those particular skills to end users?
I have to disagree. This is again a very reductionist argument. It's the idea that it's similar.
premised on
No, I
meritocracy.
understand. But
Yeah.
it's the idea and the fallacy of, like, say, communism in particular, that if you have a certain group of people who are more skilled at this thing, that they should automatically go into this thing.
I think the communists would say the opposite.
Yeah, well, they need to read. But in particular, we tend to funnel this idea that because men are better workers, then they should be all in the workforce.
This is not what I've said.
I haven't said anything that you completely said that I've inferred. So
Okay,
this
good.
is just inferred, all
All right,
right?
okay.
But when we're talking about, in particular, men going to certain places, you see now there's a backlash in men, right? Because they've been forced into these workplaces. They've been forced into these traditional roles, supposedly, right? And a lot of the times
How do you
nowadays,
define traditional?
wait. Nowadays, providing, sheltering, whatever you want to call it.
It's only traditional because now you look, once again, it's anachronistic. So you look, I'm sorry, but I do feel a lot of the discussion that we're having now is rested upon this post-colonial narrative of now we're liberal, now we're feminist, now we're X, now we're Y.
But
we
this
look
is-
back retrospectively and everything is traditional.
Come on,
everything,
Mo,
do you see?
this is the problem, and this is what I wanted to approach you in
Go on.
particular. Is
Yeah.
because right now I'm not one of those guys, and this is why I said you have to separate those kind of scientific communities in particular.
Okay.
There are people, like you said, the eugenics, right? They thought that the size of your cranium basically determines the size of your brain, and it determines the size of your intellect, right? They dropped that as soon as they found out the Arabs had larger cranium sizes on average, right? So you have a certain amount of people who want science to basically flatter them. But then you have a certain amount of people who want science, history, and whatever to help better the situation that we are in. And even now, when we talk about, say, Arab societies and whatever, right? We talk about it in a patriarchal sense, right? I would not dramatize it to be that patriarchal. But right now, to be an Arab man, it is very convenient in comparison to being an Arab female. When we're talking about, in particular, let's talk about the right to marry and so on. So the reason that men have more of a polygamy entitlement or more of a polygamy claim is because women traditionally haven't had the ability to work. So the reason certain men in the past,
I don't know about that because it
There's-
depends on what kind of work we're talking
Because
about.
again, the reason in the past certain men were able to marry more than one woman is because they could financially provide for them. It wasn't out of sexual lust. It wasn't out of even love. It wasn't even out of interest.
Again, we have to go to our premise because I've asked you this question a few times. So I would like an answer.
Okay, go on.
Right? The question always rests on the naturalistic premise. Okay, so we're saying that we both agree that men and women are not identical in their physiologies, psychologies, or their biologies, right? Now, what I'm saying to you, and I'd love to ask anyone this, in fact, not just you.
Of course.
If we agree with the premise that identical things should be treated equally and that men and women are not identical, there should be a therefore there. It's a deduction. Therefore, men and women should not be treated absolutely equally. So, for example, right, and this is why I think there is a fallacy in the feministic argument, because when feminists on the one hand, they argue for equal outcomes, equal opportunities for me is not that controversial. I'm not talking about equal opportunities. I agree that there should be to a greater extent than not.
Should we not concentrate on that as opposed to something that we both have said that it's not really a thing?
To a greater extent, but there are exceptions to the rule. Like, for example, the situation in America, where the firefighters in America had to go through a whole they do like a physical challenge. They do it in like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever. And the feminists campaigned against them. And because men are faster and stronger than women, as can be noticed by almost every sport that they partake in, with almost no controversy whatsoever. No controversy whatsoever.
I'll give you an example. You say that men.
Let me just finish. Sorry,
go on.
I just want to say that because of the feminists rallying the firefighting professionals and saying that we don't want this, what's happened is that they've had to. The course that they would have to do, the physical course, that would have taken, let's say, 10 minutes. They've had to add, let's say, a minute to it. Why? So that they can be more inclusive of women. Now the question is, if there is a burning building, who would you want to save you? A woman that could come 30 seconds later, or a man that will come 30 seconds earlier will save your life? I believe you, the biggest feminist in the building would want a man to come, even if it means admission that in this situation we don't want equality of opportunity or outcome. So this is just one specialized example. I'm not saying society is filled with those examples, but this is an exacerbated example of a situation where it's very clear that men have an advantage over women, and a non-recognition of this is tantamount to life and death. So this is where feminism can lead to death. Now, the point I'm making to you is, we have to look, because you're a man of science and you talk about empiricism and rationalism and these things. If we look holistically, and once again, what is the most effective and efficient thing for an economy, we have to take into consideration those factors. Once again, feminists, and this is the argument of Warren Farron, he says that they don't take into consideration the fact that men have been conscripted into the armies for maybe 10 for the whole of American history.
Yeah.
There's been male conscription. There has never been female conscription. If we want to equalize the historical problem of patriarchal society, what we're going to need to do is conscribe women to an army for the same amount of times that we've conscribed men to the army. So if we want equality, now we have to get women drafted, forced into being in an army, drafted and forced into being in an army the same amount of times that men had been in the past. But this argument, this is why it's a fallacious argument, and it's premised on a false premise. And the premise is, despite the despite the natural differences, we should have the equality on every level. And I'm saying to you that doesn't make any sense. If we accept the premise that identical things should be treated equally, and we identify that women are not identical to men, then there must be a space, at least in some instances, where women will be treated differently to men. That's why we have maternity leave. That's why we have so many things society has put in place for women. That's why in emergencies, women and children are taken out first before men, because it's assumed men are more physically self-sufficient, and rightfully, in my opinion, assumed that men are more physically self-sufficient than women. That's why men have been drafted into the armies. And that's why women have been able to enjoy the privilege of being protected by male military men for almost all of civilization cross-culturally.
Of course.
So we can't have our cake and eat it both. We can't say we want equality of outcome and opportunity, but at the same time have these exceptions which feminists put in place, you see, which of course entitle them to things which are otherwise not.
Then this is what I'm trying to say. Your argument is reductionist. And when I say reductionist, I say that I understand, but I say it in the sweetest sense, right? Yeah. I understand you come from a standpoint where there's a lot of colonial imperialist science that has been enforced on the Middle East as if it's the highest standard. I'm coming to say that, in particular, that's not the case. We can work together, kind of thing. Because I feel like there's a lot of conservative values that the Middle East and certain Arab countries have that the West has lost. Now, that would be a nice middle to come into. Discussing those differences, and we can meet in the middle of that. But the only problem I have to say is that when it comes to talking to Muslims in particular, that it becomes a very reductionist argument in the sense that, like you say, there's a difference between men and women. I'll ask you a simple question. Can you name me a white sprinter faster than any black female sprinter? And
that's why I say to you that I've always made the argument, I've made this on camera as well, that actually this is the fallacy of the West. Because if you look at the sprinters, and for example, black sprinters, they have consistently outperformed white sprinters for the last 100 years.
But now, why is that?
Because they're not equal.
No, but this is what I'm trying to...
Black sprinters and white sprinters are not equal.
Oh, you got to be fair. They're
not.
No, I understand.
But
why is
that?
But we know why that is. We know why that is.
Genetics.
You can't just say genetically, though.
Yes,
why
is
that?
Sometimes,
what is passed on in their genetics that makes them faster?
Well, lots of things. That's why the same thing applies now when you talk about black swimmers versus white swimmers.
Yeah.
Right? So the thing is, you have to understand. Look at Eastern Europe. Sorry, but look at Eastern Africa.
I'm just saying, you got to be fair, and you've got to build a bridge with me, right? You got to build a bridge. You've got to allow me to come into the middle. What I'm trying to say in particular is that you see where we get into a reductionist argument. The reason in particular there's more faster black female sprinters than there are white male sprinters, which should be a contradiction to this whole thing.
I don't know about that. I don't think that's correct.
Can you name one?
No. The male sprinters are faster than black swimmers.
Can you name a black swimmer, black male swimmer that is faster than a female swimmer?
We both agree.
So what I'm trying to say is there are certain environmental factors and certain cultural differences.
They're genetic factors.
That over time have bred certain differences.
Okay.
And that has nothing to do with man or woman or whatever. That has
more
to do.
But it has everything to do with it.
But it has everything to do with the environment. It has everything to do with culture. It has everything to do with nurturing.
Okay.
There's so much to this argument that we need to take into consideration. So what I'm trying to say in particular, when we talk about men and women and their equal rights, right? Yeah. We're trying to say an equal right of opportunity, because we've seen that there's different factors.
What about in the firefight?
Wait. I'll get onto that. We've seen that when given different environments and different selection pressures, human beings, whether you're man or woman, come out completely different people.
I know
they come out completely different. We need to remember, when we talk about all of these things, we need to take all of these things into consideration.
But you know what you've just applied?
And it's very similar. Give me 2 seconds.
Yeah.
It's very similar to the whole kind of like debate that we have in America about black privilege, white privilege, and whatever, so on and so. No one takes into consideration the historical benefits that white people got that black people didn't, allowing them to start their race a lot sooner than black people. But now people complain as to why we're so behind. What I'm trying to say is people don't realize the historical effect of that. And what I'm trying to say in particular is that when we come to build bridges, when I've talked to people in this park about white privilege, right, you will get the most polarized righty. But I can build a bridge with him, explain the history.
We're building bridges.
Explain,
I think we agree.
Explain the context, explain the history, and that allowed me to get on his side, understand where he's coming from, because I know exactly where they're coming from. And he's allowed to see my side and realize, you know what, there is a quantifiable reason for reparations for these people. And we haven't done enough, we've been a bit complicit and so on and so. So what I'm trying to say is, when we're talking about, say, any kind of deliberation in Islam, that's what I want. I want that bridge where you don't feel like we're attacking or anything like that.
For sure. I think this is fruitful. I want to say two things though. Like
go on.
There's two things. You said that the argument is reductionist, and then you said that, you know, there's a lot of factors that come into it. Now,
let's not get too heated about buzzwords.
No. I'm just trying to smooth out potential inconsistency. All I'll say is this. First and foremost, what you seem to have applied is genetic fallacy. Just because something has come from a certain place,
of course,
it doesn't mean it's right or wrong.
Of course,
So the fact that, for example, men have been advantaged, if we take that premise true, and it is true in some contexts, in many contexts,
it's not something they controlled,
So the fact that that is the case doesn't change the reality, the sociological reality of how to deal. That's one thing. So number two is, just because something is reductionist, it doesn't mean it's wrong. So for example, if I say 2 + 2 = 4, that's reductionist in a sense. It's mathematically reductionist because I'm taking. Or look at, for example,
not necessarily, because 2 + 2 is 4 is the highest you can go in that paragraph.
Let's say if we're looking at a fraction, if I say,
if you were to look at me and say my skin is black, that would be a reductionist argument.
Okay, if I say 15 out of 60 equals 1 out of 4, I might be wrong here.
Don't worry. I understand. Go. I'm not gonna.
All right. So here I'm reducing 15 out of 60 to 1 out of 4. Now, it's reductionist, but it doesn't mean it's wrong.
No, I understand that. I understand.
It's a good starting point academically to say something is reductionist. But then you have to explain why it's wrong.
But you would never make laws. You would never do any application of anything on a reductionist argument. There is always an elaboration.
In fact, the opposite is true. Because let me tell you why the opposite is true.
Go on.
Occam's razor, which is in fact is a premise, is you could say a principle which is applied both in physics and philosophy. Is exactly trying to reduce something to the lowest common particular multiple. So if I say, for example, the reason that the pyramids were built, or the reason why, X is Y. The reason why X is Y. I'm not going to give an example because I know every single example I give.
No, I've got an answer to this,
That's a reductionist thing. Now, if you say the only reason, that's different. If I say the main reason, so it depends on extent. Now, whatever the reason is, the point I'm making is that when it comes to men and women, the argument of the feminists, which, by the way, minority of women, like 7% of women in the UK identify with
this is why it's hard for me to see why you're conflating such radical arguments with actually neutral, kind of like trying to build bridge arguments. We'll get onto that, but let me not derail. Let me not derail your point. Let me not derail your point. Sorry, Gary.
So I was just going to say that, look, when we're talking about different kind of subsections of society, whether it be men, women, blacks, whites, or religious groups, I'm totally for the idea of building bridges. But doing so whilst keeping, for example, one's cultural heritage intact.
I think you can still do.
That's what I advocate. So I say, for example, going to exactly the crux of what you want me to talk about. I say that I'm a Muslim, right?
Of course.
There's certain things which I believe are non-negotiables in terms of my, if you like, aqidah, creed. I will never change the fact that I hope to never change the fact that I believe in one God.
Of course.
I hope to never change the fact that I believe in the Prophet Muhammad, and I hope to never change the fact that all the injunctions, including the woman's hijab or the fact that a man can wear whatever, all of these things, I accept them wholesale.
Yeah, of course.
Now, whether or not political philosophies, ideologies, etc., have contradictory outlooks on these particular premises or these particular injunctions or whatever prescriptions, for me is irrelevant. But what I would say is this, is that within Islam, and it's the same thing as I said to the guy last week, within Islam is an inbuilt flexibility which allows us to coexist. So whereas we would not agree with someone, the Quran says, "Lakum dinukum waliya din." You have your religion and I have my religion. So whereas we might not agree with these things, with X, Y, Z,
that's good,
we still can agree to disagree.
Yeah, that's good.
And that's the point, really.
No, and I absolutely believe in the freedom to believe without persecution. That's my main thing, and this is why I'm defending mostly about the grooming gangs and whatever. But I have to draw a parallel here, because when you talk about you know, we can reduce arguments to certain things and we can like go on from there. You need to understand that these are the same arguments, right, that certain idiots like Tommy Robson and all his crew use to justify their vilification of anyone else.
But you know,
when we talk about the articles,
right,
one of the biggest things that I hate about the articles is that it paints people as Muslim, right?
Yeah.
There is nowhere in the police reports that anyone has been identified as Muslim. They don't collect that information. So where they got that from, I don't know. But for them, it's a reductionist argument to think that because someone is from Pakistan and Bangladesh, automatically they're Muslim. Reductionist argument, demonizing a whole nation that doesn't necessarily need to be demonized. Now, what I'm trying to say is when we reduce arguments and we don't allow deliberation, this is what happens.
If what you're saying is that we need
and
to
what
look
I'm
at the
trying to
nuances.
say is, that's exactly it, exactly.
Right.
So
so I would agree with that.
No, but what I want in particular is I want to talk about a nuance within like the Islamic community.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that would be something that would be greatly appreciated by people in particular in the West, but also in particular, I think it would give less reason.
What's happening?
I don't know.
I think we're going to have a discussion today.
Yeah, it would give less reason for radicals like that to be able to reduce your religion and your culture and your people to one single factor that they deem is suitable for them. So what I'm trying to say is I want to build a nuance between just the Western civilization or society, whatever you want to call it, and Islam. Because right now, there's so many Middle Eastern countries that are becoming superpowers. They're going from LEDCs to MEDCs, but they're also experiencing cultural shifts as they do that. Because when you're an LEDC, you tend to stick to more traditional, fundamental religious practices, right? Especially when it comes to the whole...
I think that's, you could be conflating two things here, which is correlation versus causation.
But you did this as well with pornography. That's another thing.
Yeah,
when we were talking about pornography, you were talking about the idea that pornography supposedly shrinks your brain size and so and so. That's not the case. Addiction shrinks your brain size.
I don't think I ever said that it shrinks.
It was in the video. It was in the
Did
video.
I say shrink?
Yeah. No, not shrinks, but like decreases the brain activity, brain size, basically.
What I think I said.
Yeah.
And I remember, I think
no worries.
what I said is that.
Correct me, man. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
There's two parts of the brain.
Yeah.
There's what is referred to as the reptilian core. And there's
the
another place called the nucleus accumbens.
RNK selected.
Now, the nucleus accumbens, the reptilian core, where things like dopamine and oxytocin are secreted, when, for example, someone is stimulated, they secrete those things, yeah? Now, for example, if someone is addicted to pornography, they continually secrete dopamine, oxytocin. Now, what that does is it creates something called a withdrawal effect, which activates a part of the brain called the nucleus accumbens.
I'm just going to stop you for just a quick kind of overview kind of thing. You're describing addiction. I did psychology A levels, so I know what addiction is. And exactly. So you know observation is key. But that is what you're describing. You're describing addiction. We know in psychology that there's various mediums for addiction, and pornography is a medium for addiction. But you have to have an addictive personality to be addicted to porn in the first place. There are very many, and most of them are nuanced porn users. They go, they watch porn, and they won't watch it for maybe a week or two or a month. That's the majority of porn.
Justify the thing.
Well, let me. we can get into that. We can get into that.
Because I don't know why you would justify such a thing. You got all these feminists. I mean, do you know?
But this is the thing. I think this is the problem.
Let me tell you something really interesting.
Go on.
From a feminist perspective, a radical. She's referred to the
not
radical
a feminist.
But once again, this woman Dworkin, she wrote a book. I forget the name of the book, but I listened to it in audio.
Andrew Dworkin, is it? I can't remember. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, go ahead anyway.
She makes some really good points. I mean, talking about the commodification and objectification of women in pornography. And do you know what she says? Now to kind of stick up for the feminists.
Yeah.
She says this. She says that really this is a kind of, I don't want to misquote her, but I think she says.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm not gonna.
I think she says.
Don't worry, man. I'm not gonna
semantics. It's important.
Yeah, go.
There's something going on there. She kind of equates. I'm not gonna say prostitution, but she kind of talks about it being tantamount to some very deep kind of exploitation. And the reason why. If you think about who the ones who actually get most gratification, who it exacerbates the idea of a patriarchy if you believe in it. Pornography exacerbates it. If you look at, for example, women, how women are being treated in pornography, according to Dworkin, she says that most of the positions and stuff like that elevate men into a position of entitlement and decrease women into a position of subordination.
Absolutely false.
You think so?
False. A lot of feminists, you need to realize as well, a lot of feminist doctrines, they do kind of pander to this idea of female victimhood. And a lot of the times when we speak about this...
Now we're talking the same
language. Exactly. This is the thing. But when we talk about pornography, right, a study was done, and a lot of people love to say that men objectify women, right? Now, I find that if someone is sympathetic to a human being, they tend to concentrate on the face, because the face is where you can translate a person's emotions the most.
But
right?
men don't really do that much.
a study found that men concentrate on the face more than they do the genitals. Where did women focus on?
Go and you tell me.
The genitals. So who's objectifying who?
What
who's
study,
objectifying
what
who? I'll give it to you hopefully later.
Yeah, because there's lots of studies
no, there's a lot of studies.
But let me give you a few analytics that
like that's a very common study. If you look around, you'll find it.
No,
and then that's the thing. When we talk about this in particular, we talk about it from a standpoint where we've never actually allowed women the right to have the freedom to their own sexuality. So when we're talking about women in particular, I'll give you another study. I'll give you another study.
Go ahead.
There was a study
where.
what's
the name?
What's that?
What's the study?
Oh, no. But there was a study basically where they showed men in enticing material to measure what they were basically aroused by. They showed men on women, men on men, and animals. And the men were aroused by mostly straight porn. And obviously the gay men were aroused by gay porn. Can you tell me what the women were aroused by?
Lesbian.
Everything.
Really?
Even the animal porn.
Because
when asked later on, what were they aroused by? What did they answer? Nothing. That teaches us about the difference that we've taught women, right? What they can say versus what they actually feel. So when we're talking about women and sexuality, this is another taboo subject, and I think you raised this in the video. It's a very taboo subject that we don't talk about female sexuality, and we don't talk about it in a sense that it's a free conversation for men and women to have. It's in a lot. No, you do. don't pretend all the other guys do. I have guys like that as well. You know, they'll come over and they'll be like, oh, you know, so and so, you know, they gave me, you know, a little bit of oral, right? And I'm like, I'm a liberal man. I'm like, okay, did you give her oral back? And they're like, no, man, fuck that. Why?
Yeah, well, look,
why?
Let me tell you something.
So this is what I'm trying to say. Like when we talk about this subject, we need to remember that we don't give certain people a fair chance to speak about it. And there's a lot of ingrained cultural and historical reasons for this. Yeah. We want to go back, find out those reasons, and see whether or not they're applicable to today and they're justifiable. Yeah, that's where I think the nuance would be.
I would say that, for example, like if you look at the temperaments of both men and women, in different look, I mean, that's what we have to look at, really and truly. And this is the crux of what I'm trying to say. Men and women are different.
Yeah, they are different.
And they're different in their sexuality even.
Of course.
I'm not saying that women have a lesser sexuality or it's inferior or subordinate or subservient to the man's sexuality. But what I'm saying is completely different. For instance, looking at studies done by Google Analytics, you'll find that majority of porn users are men.
Of course.
Frequent porn users are men. Now, the idea is that I do genuinely believe women are more, and this is going to sound very cliche, very stereotypical, but it's so evident. Are more sentimental, they're more emotional, whether we like it or not. Emotional in what sense? And we have to really caveat this. Emotional in the sense that they are more, they have a higher demand for what you would refer to as affection, love. Whereas a man has a higher tendency to polygamy, I believe.
But this is the thing, this is our problem. When we talk about sexuality, we talk about it as if it's different from affection. Sexuality is affection. It's creating bonds between a human being.
But
there are studies to show.
You can have a sexual urge for someone you don't love.
Yeah, of course.
And you can love someone you don't have a sexual urge for.
Of course. But the thing is, we can't deny
but they're not interchangeable.
They're not. But you can't deny the fact that sexuality is very closely linked to the bonding practices and the courting rituals. So when we talk about, sorry, you were just saying, remind me.
Rituals.
Sorry. You were just saying about
men being more addicted to
porn and so whatever.
Yeah.
The difference between men and women is that men have testosterone, a lot more testosterone than women. Yeah. So they have a biological urge to mate and reproduce. That is their thing because it gets their genetics out faster. Yeah. Whereas women can't do that because they carry a child for 9 months. They can't get impregnated any more than that. So that's the biological difference between men and women and why you find more men are porn users than women kind of thing. Because if laws did exist and we just ran anarchy, men would be just running around having sex with everyone.
That's a good point.
But,
that's a good point.
What I'm trying to say is that we have got to this day and age now where this was all post-contraception. After contraception, it's a different talk now because a lot of people now are seeing sex more as a pleasurable thing as opposed to reproduction. Some people have run the mile with that. Some people have stayed in their core. What I'm trying to say is that we now know that there's reasons for different positions. There's reasons for different X, Y, and Z. And these are taboo subjects, even though when you scientifically analyze them, there is nuance as bread and water. You know, so when we talk about, say, like the Kama Sutra, right? The Kama Sutra existed pre-contraception.
I'm not really that familiar.
Don't worry. But it existed before it existed way before contraception and this idea of sexuality and it being a subject. Now, when we talk about the Kama Sutra, we talk about Oriental, right? We talk about Indian, we talk about African. The hieroglyphs, which are 30,000 years old, have depictions.
Now I feel.
Have depictions.
Now I feel like a real student in the classroom.
But no, seriously, like like sexuality is so much older than even some religions. But we've made it so taboo, and we need to look like back retrospectively as to why they became taboo, so that we can have a calm talk about why we can or cannot talk about them now. Now, when I see Islam and we talk about haram and stuff like that, I think it's a very noble practice, because certain things that are haram are things that can astray you from a productive life. And that is the whole point, and that's the core center of everything. Now, when you take that even on, like, let's say on a light basis, right, you will see improvements in your life. But if you live that way like a monk, right, which certain people can or can't do, you need to realize that there's certain people out here who...
I totally agree with.
There are certain people out here who are born with deformities. There are certain people out here who are born with certain conditions. That makes the race for them to have a mate a lot harder.
Yes.
So we have certain outlets for people who may not necessarily have the fair resources in order to gain a mate.
No, that's true.
So when we talk about things like as if they're a haram, when I was saying superstition, I was saying basically the fear to talk about them. And I feel like because of this fear to talk about them, a lot of people seem to view Islam as this very high, hard religion.
Yes.
And I don't want that for the religion. I know religion is much more complex than that. It's much more multifaceted. And if we gave that kind of not interpretation, but that presentation that we are allowing the conversation, and on top of that, women are working, are in much higher positions now Islamically than men. You're going to see a rise in women who don't know who they want to be with because they've been taught to climb up the ladder, even in cultural Arab places, right?
Yeah, true.
So the problem is not that we teach them about they're superior to men or they're equal to men, but understanding that now you have diminished the responsibility to get resources from the man, allowing him to live his life and passions and drive.
That's a good point.
Now, when that happens, that's an equal opportunity for men and women to explore their lives, to explore their passions, to explore their even religious beliefs.
That kind of equality sounds excellent.
Precisely. So this is what I'm trying to say. We're in this new era of feminists or women that can work and gain resources. We need not see that as a bad thing. We need not see that as a far liberal thing. We don't even, women working is not a liberal thing. It's just a thing that is naturally progressed as society is going. 100%. You had African women in all women war military units. So that says to us that women can do easily what men can do. But we must not forget the fundamental factors. Like you say, men and women are different. So if there is a war situation, men are going to be at the front line because of their bigger bone structure, their testosterone, and they're more kind of like drawn gravity to like fighting behavior. But that doesn't mean that we can't use the women as truth.
Absolutely.
So what I'm trying to say is I want to build a nuance where we can talk about this stuff. And it doesn't seem like I'm trying to bring you away or bring you astray.
No, I don't think you're doing that. I think you've given us all something to think about, man.
Yeah, because like I said, religion for me is one of those things that I want to bring myself to heavily. So that's why I've taken the Quran, I've taken the Bible, and I've taken the Torah, and it's going to go on from there because knowledge is endless, and knowledge is something that empowers us.
What I want you to take as well is my number, because what we need to do sounds like a pickup.
I don't know about that. Buy me dinner first. But yeah, no.
If you go through the Quran, anything that you question.
No, seriously, it's just because I think even when you read the Quran, like you said, I think you were talking about like how there are some traits that are barbaric, and you wouldn't necessarily apply them today, but they're very small. And they're very contextually in that historical
what I think
sense.
I was saying was that they were barbaric. If you look at it now, do you know in the Quran it says, don't let in your heart. For example, we're talking about zina. It says, don't let in your hearts there be ra'fa. Ra'fa, for example, there is a.
I love Arabic.
Ra'fa means compassion. For example, the fornicator in Islam, the one who has premarital sex, the fornicator gets in an Islamic state, all these kind of things. According to the Quran, chapter 24, verse 1-2, he gets 100 lashes. And the Quran explicitly says, don't let in your heart be any ra'fa, be any compassion when you're doing fi dinillah, in the religion of Allah. Why? Because your aesthetic value judgment doesn't necessitate truth in this.
I understand.
Just because you see something as barbaric, or just because you see something as violent, and it's very, even though the whipping and these things are not understood within the Western context.
I understand, yeah.
Then just because you see it, it doesn't mean it's false, right?
Of course.
So that's the point we're making. So the idea is, these injunctions, these punitive laws, they need to be understood in context.
Yeah.
And no doubt, obviously, if we're talking about adultery and fornication, these things, There's a whole subtopic about
Of course.
And the main thing is that it should not be, if someone does it, for example, a Muslim commits fornication, they should not tell anyone about it.
Yeah.
They should conceal their sin. And so they should not be punished even, because they're not telling anyone about it. So that's really where it is.
Yeah.
But that is kind of like a deterrent that's put in place from the Quranic.
That's exactly it. I want to talk about things that are deterrents and not necessarily take away the gravity of them being deterrents by just justifying why they were made. But I want to open up basically the bridge so that people can supposedly talk out, because there are a lot of people who feel like they can't say certain things. Like I was talking to brother, I'm not going to say his name, but brother Mo, and he was basically saying how be careful calling me a liberalist Muslim. And I was saying, well, I wasn't calling you a liberal Muslim, but he's saying even that term is very kind of like
loaded.
Yeah, it's very loaded. And I think it's loaded because you see it from a Western point of view instead of a humanitarian point of view.
Yes.
And I feel like we can come to a middle where, like I said, no validity is taken from the religion, but justifiable and kind of just humanitarian second look at the book is allowed.
I agree with. So long as someone doesn't label themselves or jeopardize their principles, I'm an advocate for someone being a Muslim, coexisting, being tolerant, and knowing where they stand in society with people that don't agree with the same thing.
It's the same with say pornography, right?
Yeah.
I have no problem with pornography, and I have no problem with pornography actors. Wait. Hear me out. You have to walk in people's shoes before you can. But I watch a lot of interviews and documentaries.
I thought you were gonna say something else.
No. My wife would never let me. 8 years, no way. But basically, what I'm trying to say is, just because I'm okay with pornography, it doesn't mean that I would want it legalized tomorrow. Because I know that we have a generation of very lazy women who want a quick buck and don't really want to work, and that industry would be flooded tomorrow.
I think it's legal already.
Yeah, but the reason there's a stigma to it is to stop that influx and stop people basing all of their traits on their sexuality. This is why it's so important that we draw distinctions between that and connections between that and the hijab. The hijab is supposed to teach a woman that the character and the spirituality is more important than the God-given assets and looks, and that they do not rely on that completely throughout their lives. Otherwise, they will find themselves in problems. But at the same time, you get a lot of women who wear hijab and they're wearing makeup that looks absolutely...
I think me and you agree.
Yeah.
On that note, should we get a drink?
Yes.
I'm thirsty.
No, I've got mine already.
Let me get you another one.
يا لغتي عربية حسبي بأنك منطقي وبياني